Ever notice how ads always pop up at the worst moments? When the killer's identity is about to be revealed. During that perfect meditation flow. On Amazon Music, we believe in keeping you in the moment. That's why we've got millions of ad-free podcast episodes, so you can stay completely immersed in every story, every reveal, every breath. Download the Amazon Music app and start listening to your favorite podcasts ad-free, included with Prime.
Getting aid, those vital supplies, to people caught right in the middle of conflict zones. I mean, it's just an incredibly tough challenge, isn't it?
It really is.
How do you ensure things like food, medicine, even fuel actually reach the people who desperately need them? And crucially, without getting diverted or lost in the chaos.
Exactly. That's the core problem.
So today, we're going to dig into a new proposal aiming to tackle just that. It's called the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, or GHF. And this plan, well, it's already stirring up a lot of discussion, a lot of debate, strong views on all sides.
Definitely. And we've got some really interesting source material to work through here. We'll be looking at Ambassador Mike Huckabee's press conference where this was announced.
Right.
Then there's a UN news report detailing their, well, significant worries about it.
Right.
An article from ID Tech touching on biometric security, which might play a role. Plus, a research paper from the IDSF, that's the Institute for Zionist Strategies, outlining their own humanitarian islands plan.
Another plan.
Yeah, related but maybe distinct. And CNN's reporting, of course, covering the U.S. announcement and the UN pushing back. And finally, the GHF's own overview document explaining their side.
So quite a mix of perspectives.
Absolutely. And our goal really is to help you understand this GHF proposal. What are its objectives? How does it plan to operate? And importantly, what are the reactions, the concerns, the potential hurdles?
So by the end, you, the listener, should have a much clearer picture of this really complex situation.
That's the aim.
Okay, let's start with the context, the situation on the ground. It seems everyone agrees the humanitarian picture in Gaza is, well, dire.
Yeah, critical is probably the word. Ambassador Huckabee himself acknowledged a major crisis.
Right.
And the UN, they've been sounding the alarm for a while now. Stark warnings about, potential famine, health services collapsing because there's just no fuel, no supplies getting through consistently.
And the numbers involved, they're huge.
Sobering, yeah. CNN reported, and this comes from the GHF info too, that their initial phase, it aims to feed about 1.2 million people.
Wow, 1.2 million.
That's roughly 60% of Gaza's population. And the aspiration, the hope, is to eventually reach over 2 million.
So the scale is immense.
And you have UNRWA, the UN Agency for Palestinian Refugees, saying they're running out of everything: food, fuel, medicine. It just highlights how urgent this all is.
Okay, so that's the backdrop. Utter crisis. And into this comes the U.S.-Israeli proposal, the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, the GHF.
Right. As Ambassador Huckabee and the GHF's own documents state, it's a new private foundation initiated by the U.S.
And its core purpose. What's the fundamental goal here?
Well, the main objective, and they really stress this, is getting aid directly to Palestinian civilians. Directly.
Okay.
While, and this is the key part, preventing Hamas from accessing it. That concern about aid being diverted by Hamas is really the driving force behind this whole thing.
So how do they plan to actually do that? They talk about a new operating model. What does that mean in practice?
Right, the new operating model. So the GHF overview lays it out. First, they plan to establish 4 initial secure distribution sites, SDSs.
Secure sites.
Think of them like fortified hubs for aid delivery. Each one is designed to serve up to 300,000 people continuously.
So 4 sites, 300,000 people each. That gets you to the 1.2 million initial target.
Exactly. And what they'll distribute there is prepackaged food rations, hygiene kits, medical supplies. The documents also mention potentially distributing fuel too.
And how do they stop it getting diverted from those sites or on the way there?
That's where the control aspect comes in. They talk about tightly controlled corridors for moving the aid and real-time monitoring systems. The idea is to track everything, prevent diversion.
That's expensive.
They've put a number on it around $1.31 US per meal, and they say that covers everything. Buying the supplies, the logistics, the distribution, and importantly, the security.
Right, security. Which leads to the question, who's actually running this foundation? Who's in charge?
Good question. The GHF overview gives quite a bit of detail on leadership. The board includes names like Nate Mook, former CEO of World Central Kitchen.
Okay. Experience there.
Raisa Scheinberg from MasterCard, Jonathan Foster from Current Capital, Luke Henderson, a lawyer. Then the executive team is led by Jake Wood, founder of Team Rubicon.
Another known name in disaster response.
Yes. David Burke as COO, John Acree as head of mission, and they've got an advisory board too. Includes David Beasley, former head of the World Food Program, though his involvement is noted as to be finalized.
Interesting caveat.
Also, Bill Miller, a former UN security director, and Lieutenant General Mark Schwartz, retired, who used to be the U.S. security coordinator for Israel and the Palestinian Authority.
So a mix of humanitarian, business, security, diplomatic backgrounds.
A pretty diverse group, yeah, trying to bring different expertise together.
And you mentioned security several times. It's obviously crucial here. What are the specifics? How will these sites and the aid movement be protected?
Indeed. This is a key part. According to Ambassador Huckabee and CNN, the actual on-site security, like right at the distribution points in the immediate area around them,
Right.
will be handled by private U.S. military contractors.
Private contractors, okay.
And the GHF overview adds an interesting detail. They plan to use personnel who have experience securing the Netzarim corridor.
The Netzarim corridor. That was an Israeli military route in Gaza, wasn't it?
Exactly. So it suggests they're looking for people familiar with that specific challenging environment, familiar with controlled access protocols.
And what about the broader security outside these sites?
That's where the IDF, the Israel Defense Forces, comes in. Huckabee explained their role is to provide the necessary military security in the wider area, sort of an outer layer of protection for the whole operation.
Okay, so private contractors inside, IDF outside. And the funding for all this?
Yeah.
You said $1.31 a meal, but where does the overall budget come from?
Right. Both Huckabee and that IDSF paper we mentioned indicate the plan is for international donors to fund the GHF.
So not Israeli taxpayers.
That's the stated intention, yes. Huckabee said several international partners have agreed to contribute, but they're not naming names just yet while things are finalized. And the GHF itself says it's actively seeking more donations and looking to partner with NGOs to support the work.
It all sounds very structured. But with aid, especially in a conflict, transparency and accountability are huge. What measures are planned for that? How do we know the aid gets where it's intended?
That's a critical point, and the GHF overview does address it. They mentioned several things: third-party audits of their operations,
Okay, independent checks.
engaging legal counsel for compliance, setting up secure banking with major institutions like Truist and JP Morgan.
Standard financial controls.
Yes, and technologically, they plan for real-time monitoring to track the aid, plus a system for beneficiary feedback, letting people receiving the aid give input.
Feedback loop, okay.
And they say data from the monitoring and feedback will go into public dashboards. The idea is to allow for more scrutiny, more verification.
So on paper, it seems like they've thought about oversight. But we know the UN and other big aid groups are not on board. They've rejected this plan.
Emphatically rejected it, yes. Reports from CNN and UN News make that very clear.
Why? What are their main objections?
Jens Lyric from the UN's Humanitarian Office, OCHA, voiced some really fundamental concerns. He said the plan, as they see it, could breach core humanitarian principles:
Which principles?
neutrality, impartiality, and independence. These are pillars of humanitarian action. He even described it as a potential deliberate attempt to, and I quote, weaponize aid.
Weaponize aid. That's incredibly strong language.
It is. It highlights a deep fundamental clash. You have the U.S.-Israeli focus on controlled delivery to stop diversion versus the established UN approach of reaching everyone in need without political conditions attached.
A classic dilemma in these situations.
Absolutely. It plagues aid efforts in contested areas all the time.
So beyond the principles, what are the UN's practical concerns with this specific GHF model?
Well, several things. First, the number of distribution sites. It's just 4 initially.
Right, we mentioned that.
The UN contrasts that with the previous system, which they say had around 400 distribution points. Their worry is that having only 4 sites forces civilians to travel really long distances.
Potentially dangerous journeys.
Exactly. Through active conflict areas, potentially. Ambassador Huckabee did say their logistics planning aimed to minimize travel, but clearly the UN isn't convinced.
What else worries them?
They're concerned the plan might actually put civilians in more danger, perhaps forcing them to cross IDF lines to get to these few hubs.
A different view on safety, then.
A very different view. And adding to the tension, the UN claims Israeli officials have been trying to shut down the existing UN-run aid system anyway.
So there's existing friction there.
Definitely. And you also have Palestinian aid groups, represented by Amjad al-Shawa, saying they weren't consulted, received no information about the GHF plan, and they question if it even follows basic humanitarian principles. Lack of transparency from their end.
So, a real disconnect between the U.S.-Israel plan and the established international aid community. What about the broader Israeli perspective, beyond just stopping Hamas?
Yeah.
And where does this humanitarian islands plan fit in?
Well, Ambassador Huckabee stressed Israel does support getting aid in, but the Hamas diversion concern is paramount, and the U.S. shares that concern, hence backing the GHF.
Okay.
Now, the Gaza Humanitarian Islands plan from the IDSF, the Institute for Zionist Strategies, it's related, but perhaps a different beast altogether.
How so?
Its core ideas involve much more direct Israeli oversight of aid distribution. It talks about dismantling UNRWA and Hamas networks entirely.
Okay, a more radical shift.
Setting up specific zones or cities for internally displaced persons in open areas, dividing Gaza into segments for control purposes, and yes, international funding, but with Israel firmly in control of distribution.
And they have a philosophy behind that.
They have a very clear line. The hand that distributes the aid is the hand that controls it. It's about using aid as a lever of control, essentially, much more explicit than the GHF framing.
So the IDSF plan seems much more about direct Israeli management, whereas the GHF, while coordinated with Israel, is presented as the U.S.-initiated private foundation with international involvement.
That's a key distinction, yes. And the IDSF plan even mentions using biometric certificates for people in these proposed IDP cities.
Biometrics, like fingerprinting or facial recognition.
Potentially. To monitor movement, prevent Hamas infiltration. That ties into the ID Tech article about using biometric security in aid settings generally.
Interesting tech angle.
And the IDSF is quite blunt. They say their plan fits Israel's war aims and argues against keeping UNRWA or accepting any Hamas civil role.
So very different approaches floating around. Despite this, Huckabee insisted the U.S. isn't trying to sideline Netanyahu's government.
Right. He made a point of denying any attempt to work around the Israeli government, stressing the ironclad U.S.-Israel relationship, trying to smooth over any appearance of friction, perhaps.
And Hamas, what's their take on this GHF proposal?
Predictably, very negative. CNN reported they see it as part of, quote, Israeli plans for displacement and subjugation through a policy of starvation.
Strong words again.
Yes. And they've called on the international community to stop what they call the militarization of aid. Deep suspicion there about the motives behind GHF.
Okay, so let's try and pull this together. We have this desperate humanitarian crisis. We have the U.S.-Israeli GHF proposal facing major pushback from the UN and aid groups. We have this other Israeli think tank idea, the humanitarian islands. What are the real sticking points, the big challenges here?
Well, the absolute core issue is that fundamental disagreement. How do you deliver aid effectively and neutrally in this environment? Is tight control the priority, or is universal access based on need?
The diversion risk versus humanitarian principles.
Exactly. Then there are practical questions.
Right.
Are just 4 sites feasible? Are they safe? How do you ensure aid actually reaches everyone, especially the 40% not even covered in the GHS initial phase? That's a huge gap.
And trust seems to be a major issue.
Massive. Trust between the parties, trust from donors, funding these different mechanisms, and just the sheer logistics. Scaling up aid in a war zone with damaged infrastructure, constant security threats, it's immensely difficult.
And you have these contrasting models, the GHF trying to be non-governmental but heavily secured versus the IDSF idea of more direct state control.
Right. 2 very different philosophies about how aid should function in this specific context.
It's incredibly complicated, deeply sensitive, and there are clearly no easy answers here. As we wrap up this deep dive, what are the key things you think our listeners should take away?
I think first, just acknowledging the sheer scale and urgency of the humanitarian need in Gaza. It's undeniable and demands a response.
Right.
Second, understand that the GHF is the U.S.-backed proposal aiming for secure, transparent aid delivery, primarily to prevent diversion to Hamas. But third, this plan faces significant opposition from the UN and established aid groups over fundamental principles like neutrality and practical concerns about feasibility and reach.
Okay.
And finally, be aware that other ideas, like the Humanitarian Islands Plan, exist, suggesting alternative, potentially more interventionist approaches involving direct Israeli oversight. It's a complex landscape of proposed solutions.
So, as you, our listener, process all this, the crisis, the proposals, the conflicts, what's a final thought we can leave you with to ponder?
Maybe this. Given the desperate need, but also the real security risks and these deeply held conflicting principles, what factors do you think are the absolute most critical when evaluating any aid plan in a place like Gaza?
Mm.
Think about effectiveness, sure, but also the ethical side. Whose perspective matters most? The civilians needing aid, the aid workers on the ground, the governments involved, the security forces. How do you weigh those often competing priorities?
That's a tough balancing act.
It really is. And we'd encourage you, if you want to understand more, to look up the organizations and reports we've talked about today. Really dig into the details yourself.
Definitely food for thought. Thanks for breaking that down.
You're welcome. It's a vital issue to understand.